You'll never be one of us, you know." The words, spoken by my mother-in-law, Eleanor, were not a shout, but a silken whisper that cut through the cheerful clatter of the dinner party. They were celebrating. We were celebrating. The new bottling equipment for Lockwood Vineyards had just been installed, the final piece of the modernization project I had bankrolled. My husband, Mark, was at the head of the table, laughing at something his brother said, oblivious. Eleanor's eyes, the same pale gray as a winter sky, were fixed on me. There was no heat in them, just a cold, settled fact. A crystal glass of the family's signature Chardonnay, a vintage made possible by my investment, was raised in her hand. She gave me a tight, conspiratorial smile, as if we were sharing a private joke. I felt the air leave my lungs, a silent punch. Around me, the family I had tried so desperately to join continued to toast their future, a future built with my money. I felt a slow, icy calm spread through me. I picked up my own glass, met her gaze, and smiled back. A genuine, serene smile. She had no idea. Before Mark, my life was a series of glass-walled boardrooms and sterile, minimalist apartments overlooking the San Francisco Bay. I was the founder of a successful data analytics startup, a world of algorithms and venture capital that I had navigated with fierce precision. But it was a solitary existence. The accolades were fulfilling. The financial security was empowering. But my nights were quiet. I yearned for the messy, chaotic warmth of a family, something I never really had growing up in a series of foster homes. Then I met Mark at a tech conference. He wasn't in my world. He was a guest, representing his family's struggling boutique winery. He spoke of heritage, of soil and sun, of a legacy passed down through generations. He was charming, grounded, and he saw me not as a CEO, but as Amelia. When he took me home to meet his family, I was enchanted. The sprawling Lockwood estate, with its ancient oaks and rows of grapevines, felt like a storybook. His mother, Eleanor, was the matriarch, formidable and elegant. His father, a quiet man who let her lead. His siblings and their spouses were a tight-knit clan, finishing each other's sentences. I fell in love not just with Mark, but with the idea of them. I wanted to be a Lockwood. I wanted my future children to run through those vineyards. So when I sold my company for a sum that was staggering even to me, I didn't hesitate. Mark had explained how the vineyard was drowning in debt, using antiquated equipment, unable to compete. With a real investment, he'd said, his eyes shining with hope, we could not only save it, we could make it one of the best in the region. It became my project, my offering, my proof of commitment. I didn't just write a check, I poured myself into it. I spent months with agricultural consultants, sourced state-of-the-art equipment from Italy, and hired a top oenologist to refine their process. I saw it as building our shared future. I traded my penthouse for a guest house on their property, my sharp business suits for jeans and boots. I learned about soil pH and grape varietals. I thought my sacrifice and my contribution were my entry fee. I was buying my way into a family, and I was so desperate for what they had. I didn't realize they had no intention of ever letting me in. I was the bank, the benefactor, the convenient outsider who could be thanked with a polite smile, but never, ever be considered one of them. The exclusion wasn't a single, grand act of cruelty. It was 1,000 tiny paper cuts, each one a subtle reminder of my otherness. It started with conversations that would halt the moment I entered a room, resuming in hushed tones only after I had settled, an invisible wall materializing around me. The first time it truly stung was the day of the annual family portrait. I'd spent an hour getting ready, choosing a dress in a soft blue that Eleanor had once complimented. When I walked out onto the lawn, the photographer was already arranging them on the grand stone steps of the main house. Mark, his parents, his brother's family. "Oh, Amelia," Eleanor said, her voice bright and brittle. "We're just doing a quick one of the original Lockwood line. For the historical records, you know. We'll do group shots later." Mark just gave me a helpless shrug, a silent plea for me to understand. I stood off to the side, smiling a fixed, painful smile, watching them compose a perfect picture of a life I was funding, but not a part of. The group shots never happened. Then came the trip to Tuscany. It was pitched as a research trip, a chance to visit legacy vineyards and get ideas for our own. My idea, my expense. Yet, they discussed the itinerary in a rapid-fire family shorthand, referencing childhood trips and old jokes that I couldn't possibly understand. On the plane, I found I was seated 10 rows behind them. A booking mix-up, Mark had explained, patting my hand before disappearing into the premium cabin with his family. In Florence, they announced they were having a special dinner at a restaurant their grandfather had loved. It's just a little family tradition, darling. Very nostalgic. You wouldn't enjoy it, his father said, gently, as if sparing my feelings. I ate alone that night in the hotel restaurant, the taste of my expensive pasta turning to ash in my mouth as I imagined their laughter carrying over the Tuscan hills. The worst was the small daily humiliations. At dinner, they'd reminisce about Mark's high school girlfriend, Claire, a local girl from a good family. Eleanor would sigh and say she had such a wonderful understanding of country life. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My contributions were transactional, my presence conditional. I was the architect of their new prosperity, but I was never allowed to live in the house I had built. I was a foreign body, a necessary but ultimately unassimilable element. Mark, caught between the woman he loved and the family that defined him, chose silence, and his silence was the most humiliating cut of all. It told me that their comfort was more important than my dignity. The breaking point came not with a whisper, but with a sterile, beeping silence. It was a Tuesday. I'd been feeling a sharp, persistent pain in my side for weeks, dismissing it as stress. But that morning, it escalated into something I couldn't ignore. I collapsed on the floor of the guest house, the world tilting into a gray, nauseating blur. I managed to call an ambulance before calling Mark. He answered on the third ring, his voice breathless and excited. "Amelia, you won't believe it. The first run with the new press is perfect. The clarity is incredible." "Mark," I gasped, my voice thin. "I'm on my way to the hospital." I collapsed. There was a pause. I could hear the hum of the machinery and the distant shouts of the vineyard workers in the background. Oh, God, is it serious?" "They think it's my appendix. They might have to operate," I said, the paramedic's voice a low murmur beside me. Okay. Listen," he said, his voice strained. "Today is the most critical day of the harvest. We can't stop. Mom and Dad are here. Everyone is. This is the culmination of everything. Can you handle it for a few hours? I'll come as soon as we're done." The words hung there. Can you handle it? As if emergency surgery were an inconvenience I could schedule. A few hours later, a nurse handed me my phone. A text from Mark. "Things are crazy here. Dad says he'll try to swing by tomorrow. Be strong." Then a call from Eleanor. I answered, expecting, foolishly, a flicker of concern. "Amelia," she said, her tone crisp and businesslike. "Mark told me about your situation. I trust it's being managed. I just want to be clear that he cannot leave the vineyard right now. This harvest is the lifeblood of this family. The business you so generously funded can't run itself. Our obligations are here." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't offer comfort. She simply stated the family's position. I was an asset, and my personal crisis was a liability to the business. I was alone in a cold hospital room, staring at the white ceiling. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only reply. I had poured my heart, my soul, and my fortune into a family that, in my moment of absolute vulnerability, had decided I was less important than a batch of grapes. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it didn't even hurt anymore. It was just clear. The final veil had been lifted. I disconnected the call, and in the profound, echoing silence, I finally understood. I was not, and would never be, one of them. And for the first time, I felt nothing but relief. The hours after the surgery were a blur of pain and anesthetic fog. When I became fully lucid, the world felt muted, gray. I was an island in that starched hospital bed. The flowers Mark had ordered, a gaudy, impersonal bouquet, sat wilting on the windowsill. There were no calls, no more texts. There was only the quiet hum of the hospital. That evening, a nurse came in to check my vitals. She was a woman in her late 50s, with kind eyes etched with smile lines and a no-nonsense warmth about her. Her name tag read, Maria. She took my blood pressure, her touch gentle but firm. "No visitors tonight, honey?" she asked softly, her voice devoid of pity, just simple observation. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "Family's busy," she nodded, as if she understood everything. "Happens more than you'd think. People get so tangled in their own lives, they forget what matters." She adjusted my pillows. My husband, when he was in for his heart, his brothers were too busy watching the game to come. The playoffs, she said, rolling her eyes with a shared, knowing humor. Men. The simple act of her sharing a piece of her own life, of creating a tiny two-person circle of understanding, cracked something open in me. A single tear escaped and rolled down my temple. Maria didn't fuss. She just took a tissue from the box and gently wiped it away. "You know what you need?" she said. "A decent cup of tea. Not this dishwater they serve." She disappeared for a few minutes and returned with a steaming mug that smelled of bergamot and something deeply comforting. It was her own personal stash from the break room. "Here," she said, placing it in my hands. "Earl Grey. Cures most ailments of the soul." We sat in silence for a moment as I sipped the tea. It was hot, strong, and real. In that simple, profound act of kindness from a complete stranger, I felt more seen and cared for than I had in years of trying to earn the Lockwoods' affection. Maria saw a woman who was alone and needed a cup of tea. She didn't see a walking bank account or a convenient outsider. She saw a person. "You have a good, strong face," she said as she prepared to leave. "The kind that's seen things but isn't broken. Don't you let anyone make you feel small. You're not small." When she left, the room didn't feel so empty. Her words echoed in my mind. "You're not small." For years, I had shrunk myself to fit into their world, making my success palatable, my opinions softer, my needs secondary. I had been waiting for them to grant me value. Maria, with a cup of tea and a few honest words, reminded me that my value was inherent. It wasn't something to be awarded. It was mine. The shift inside me was seismic. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about reclamation. Back in the guest house 2 days later, moving stiffly, I felt like a stranger in what was supposed to be my home. The air was thick with the sweet, cloying smell of fermenting grapes from the winery, the scent of my own betrayal. I ignored the missed calls from Mark that had finally started trickling in. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I already knew what they would say. Excuses, justifications, weak apologies. They were noise. I needed clarity. I sat at the small desk overlooking the very vineyards I had resurrected and dialed a number I hadn't needed in years. "Jessica, it's Amelia Stone." Jessica Thorne had been my corporate lawyer for a decade, a woman whose mind was as sharp as a shard of glass. "Amelia, I was wondering when you'd call. I read about the sale of your company. I trust retirement is treating you well?" Her voice was dry, professional. "Not exactly retirement," I said, my voice steady. "Jessica, I need you to pull up the investment agreement I had you draft for a family business a few years ago, Lockwood Vineyards." I could hear the faint click of her keyboard. "Ah, yes. The passion project. The ironclad one. I remember. You wanted to protect your investment, but also give them autonomy. A structured, interest-free loan convertible to a majority equity stake under specific conditions. Let me see." More clicking. "Here it is. The conversion clause can be triggered by a sale of the business, a default on certain operational covenants, or, a dissolution of the marital partnership." "A dissolution of the marital partnership," I repeated, the words tasting like freedom. "That's correct," Jessica said. "If you file for divorce, you have the right, within 90 days, to convert the full loan amount into a 75% controlling interest in Lockwood Vineyards LLC. You essentially become the owner. They become minority shareholders with no operational authority. It was a smart clause, Amelia. You were protecting your capital from precisely this kind of entanglement." I looked out the window. I saw Mark's truck pull up to the main house. I saw Eleanor get out, directing workers with an imperial wave of her hand. They were moving around in a world they thought was theirs, built on a foundation they thought was a gift. They had mistaken my love for foolishness. They had mistaken my generosity for weakness. "There's no question of a fight," Jessica continued. "It's airtight. Their signatures are on every page. Did they think you, of all people, would hand over $8 million on a handshake?" A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't triumphant or vengeful. It was the calm, quiet smile of a CEO who has just identified a non-performing asset and decided on a course of action. I had been their benevolent benefactor. Now I would simply be their boss. "Jessica," I said, my voice clear and firm, the fog of the last few years finally lifting. "Initiate the process, file for the divorce this afternoon, and draw up the papers for the equity conversion. I'll be exercising my option. Consider it done, she said. Welcome back, Amelia. I hung up the phone. The smell of the grapes no longer smelled like betrayal. It smelled like assets. The fallout was not a dramatic explosion, but a slow, quiet implosion that I observed from the serene distance of a sleek, minimalist apartment I rented in the city. The divorce papers were served to Mark at the vineyard. The legal notice of my equity conversion was delivered to Eleanor's grand home by a courier the same day. The effect, I heard later, was catastrophic. The first thing I did as the majority owner was to put the business under professional management. I hired a CEO, a woman with a stellar reputation for turning around luxury brands. Her first mandate was a full financial audit. The calls started immediately. First, a flood of rambling, panicked voicemails from Mark. Amelia, what is this? A mistake? A joke? We can talk about this. Don't do this to my family. The use of my family was not lost on me. Then came the emails from his brother, full of blustering threats about lawyers, which I simply forwarded to Jessica. She informed him that his family had already been paid far more for their 25% stake than it was worth, thanks to my investment, and any legal challenge would be fruitless. The most satisfying information came indirectly, through a gossipy real estate agent I knew in the area. The operational covenants I'd had Jessica include in the loan were things the Lockwoods, in their arrogance, had ignored. Things like maintaining a certain debt-to-equity ratio and not using business accounts for personal expenses. The audit revealed they had been living off the company. The leased luxury cars in the driveway, Eleanor's extravagant redecorating of the main house, the research trip to Tuscany, all funded by the vineyard's line of credit. Under new management, those taps were turned off. The corporate credit cards were canceled. The cars were repossessed. I heard Eleanor had to let her housekeeper and gardener go. The grand family estate started to look a little less grand, a little more weathered. They were forced to face a reality they hadn't known for years. They had to live within their means. And their means, without my money propping them up, were surprisingly modest. The new CEO, a pragmatic woman named Diane, called me once. They're trying to be difficult, she said. The mother, Eleanor, showed up yesterday, demanding to know why we changed the label design. I had to have security escort her out. I pictured it. Eleanor, the undisputed queen of her small kingdom, being told she no longer had any authority. There was no joy in it. Not really. But there was a profound, quiet sense of justice. They had built their identity on being the Lockwoods of Lockwood Vineyards. Now the vineyard was mine. They were just the Lockwoods. I wondered what that felt like. From the frantic, angry, and eventually pleading messages that Mark left, which I never returned, I gathered it felt like drowning. My new life began with light. I chose an apartment on a high floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a city skyline, not rolling hills. The space was mine, filled with things that brought me joy, a single perfect orchid instead of fussy bouquets, abstract art that challenged the eye, shelves of books I finally had time to read. The silence was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. I started reclaiming the parts of myself I had packed away. I enrolled in an advanced Italian course at the university, not for research, but for the pure pleasure of the language, the lyrical cadence of it. The trip to Tuscany no longer felt like a scar. It became a place I wanted to visit again, on my own terms. I bought a professional-grade camera, a Leica, and took up street photography. I spent hours walking through the city, anonymous and observant, capturing fleeting moments of life, an old man laughing on a park bench, a child chasing pigeons, the stark geometry of shadows on a brick wall. For years, I had been the one who was watched, judged, and evaluated. Now, I was the watcher, the one framing the world as I saw it. It was an act of profound power. I reconnected with old friends from my life in tech, women who had seen me as a peer, not a checkbook. We had long dinners filled with sharp, intelligent conversation and easy laughter. They had been mystified when I'd given it all up for a man and his family's winery. They weren't surprised when it ended. "We've missed you, Amelia," one of them said, raising a glass. The real you. I didn't date. The idea felt exhausting. My relationship was with myself, and it was a fulfilling one. I traveled. I went to Kyoto to see the cherry blossoms, to Stockholm to explore the design museums. I went alone, on my own schedule, following my own whims. The vineyard, now professionally managed and turning a healthy profit, was a line item on a financial statement. It was an asset, completely detached from the emotional weight it once held. I received quarterly reports from Diane, the CEO. The new vintage, under a label I had approved, was winning awards. It was a successful business, my business. One afternoon, sorting through photos I'd taken, I came across one of a young woman painting in the park, her face a mask of concentration and joy. I remembered how I used to feel that way in boardrooms, solving a complex problem, building something from nothing. I had that feeling back. I hadn't lost myself in the Lockwoods world. I had just been on a detour. Now, I was home. About a year after the dust had settled, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another attempt by Mark from a new number. But something made me open it. The message read, "Hi, Amelia. This is Lily, Mark's daughter. My dad. I got your number from an old Christmas card. I hope it's okay that I'm texting you. I know things are bad. I just wanted to say something. I'm 17 now, and maybe I don't understand everything, but I understand more than they think. I saw how they treated you. At family dinners, when they would talk in code so you couldn't follow. The family picture thing. I saw your face that day. I was embarrassed for them. For us, Grandma Eleanor is just bitter. She's angry all the time now because she can't be the queen of the vineyard anymore. And Dad is just lost. He follows her around like a shadow. They blame you for everything, but I know it's not true. You gave them everything, and they threw you away when you needed them. I heard them talking that day you went to the hospital. Grandma said it was an inconvenient distraction. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in this family is like that. I always thought you were cool. You talked to me about books and what I wanted to do after school. They never ask about that. I'm applying to colleges now. I want to study art history, maybe in New York. I wanted to say thank you for showing me that a woman can be strong and build her own life, even when people are awful. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Lily. I read the message 3 times. My hands were trembling slightly. I had built such a fortress around my heart, brick by careful brick, to protect myself from anything related to the Lockwoods. But this message wasn't a battering ram. It was a small, fragile seed pushing its way through a crack in the wall. Lily. I remembered her as a quiet, observant teenager who always seemed to be on the periphery, watching. It turned out she saw everything. Her words were a validation more profound than any legal victory. They weren't an apology from the people who had wronged me, but an acknowledgement from the one person who represented the future. For the first time in a long time, an emotion connected to that family resonated in me, and it wasn't anger or hurt. It was a complex, aching tenderness for the girl who had the courage to see the truth. I sat with Lily's message for a full day, letting the words settle. My first instinct was a cautious retreat to thank her politely and reinforce the wall. But that felt like a disservice to her bravery. She hadn't just sent a text, she had extended a hand across a chasm of her family's making. Her message deserved more than a simple acknowledgement. It deserved the truth. I finally picked up my phone and began to type, carefully choosing each word. Dear Lily, thank you so much for your message. It meant more to me than you can know. Getting it was a complete surprise, but a welcome one. I remember you very well, a thoughtful, intelligent young woman with a wonderful eye for the world around you. I'm not surprised at all that you saw things so clearly. You don't have to apologize for your family. Their choices are their own, just as my choices are mine. The hardest lesson in life, I think, is learning that we cannot control how other people behave or how they see us. We can only control how we respond and who we decide to be. It took me a long time to relearn that. What your grandmother and father did was deeply painful, and it created a break that cannot be repaired. That chapter of my life is closed. It has to be, for my own peace. But I want you to know very clearly that this has nothing to do with you. You are not defined by their actions or their bitterness. I am so thrilled to hear you're applying to colleges for art history. That's wonderful. New York is a fantastic city for that. If you do end up coming here, I would love to take you to the Met or the MoMA. No strings attached, no family talk, just 2 people who appreciate art and a good conversation. My door is closed to them, Lily, but it is not closed to you. You are building your own life, separate from all of that, and that is an amazing, courageous thing to do. Never let anyone, not even family, dim the light that you have. I am happy now, truly. I found my way back to myself, and I wish you all the happiness in the world as you go forward to find yours. Warmly, Amelia. As I hit send, I felt a final quiet click inside me, like a lock settling into place. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense, but it was a release. I had separated the toxic system from the blameless individual. I had asserted my boundaries while still offering a sliver of grace. My identity was no longer tied to my relationship with them or my rejection by them. It wasn't Amelia, the ex-wife, or Amelia, the spurned benefactor. It was just Amelia, a woman who had funded a business, left a marriage, reclaimed her fortune, and was now contemplating a trip to the Met with a young woman who had chosen kindness over loyalty. The future was not about them. It was about art and travel and new connections, all built on a foundation of my own making. It was about freedom. If you've ever had to fight to reclaim your own story, you know how powerful this journey is. Subscribe for more stories about resilience, strength, and finding justice on your own terms. And now, we want to hear from you. Share a moment in the comments below when you chose yourself, even when it was the hardest thing to do. Your story matters, and your strength inspires us all.